Hey, this is David Wolinsky, back with another interview from the audio archives of NoDon'tDie.com. This time I'm bringing to you the second half of my conversation with Anton Risberg. He and I spoke on October 17th, 2015, and at the time he was a 24-year-old lapsed video game player living in Sweden. If you'd like to read transcripts of other interviews I've been doing these last few years, you can hop on over to NoDon'tDie.com. You'll also see a link to my Patreon, where your support helps me continue on with this independent reporting and exploring. And now, here's Anton Risberg.
So I'm curious to hear your perspective. I feel like sentences I never see on the internet, and I don't know, I feel like maybe I used to a little bit more, but it's just I never see these sentences of I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, or, I have no opinion on this.
Yeah.
Is the internet in Sweden different?
No, it's terrible. It's awful. There's
How so?
It's full of spiteful racists.
So it's just like America?
Yeah, I guess, but we don't really have the flag wavers. We don't have the stupid asses. They're pretty fucking stupid because they're overtly racist and rely on completely false facts. But
so it is just like America.
Yeah, I guess, but they have this sort of professional attitude about them. They try to be as grammatically correct as possible. It's like the Forsham breed of racism. Yeah, it's atrocious. It's horrible. You get these people everywhere, and they're the standard sort of disgruntled white male kind of guys who are as soon as somebody opens their mouth on TV and says something like, women have it bad because of this reason, they're like, yeah, but men have it bad as well. On the internet, then they go nuts about that sort of thing, and then they threaten someone, and it's like they always have a fake account and that kind of thing. It happens all the goddamn time. They're chauvinists and racists, and there's lots of them, and Swedish people online tend to love cynicism as well, which I think is a shame because cynicism is just bullshit.
Sometimes I wonder, what this project is really about, and I'm not asking you to answer. I mean, obviously it can be about a couple of different things, but I feel like, stuff about the internet, stuff about consumer culture seems to come up a lot. I mean, is it just sort of inevitable, any sort of subculture that exists, we're just going to end up, resenting some people or getting really angry at some people? I mean, isn't this supposed to be a medium that's supposed to be fun and welcoming to different types of fun and different types of ideas for fun?
I don't think it ever really was that, though. You look back at early internet stuff, I remember it being you had people in my school were watching a site called Stick Death, which is stickmen fighting each other. We didn't have the context of people today. So we didn't realize it was SWAT-looking Americans killing green people in turbans all the time.
Yeah.
And it's oh yeah, this dude is firing a gun at this guy and it's dying. It's kind of cool because it's stickmen. And so that's internet anno 2001. And that's not really early for internet, but it's a very different internet than today because social media didn't really exist then.
No, I mean, if you're talking people's perceptions, 2001 may as well be the 1800s.
Yeah. I sort of thought about that. I'm born in 91, so the internet's in some sense been around my entire life, but it doesn't feel like it has. I remember being a kid and having no connection with the internet at all.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder about what it was like in the days before? Before the internet? I'm of the last generation that, or maybe you a little bit of we can remember what it was like before the ability to, go down any rabbit hole at any moment or just shout at anyone at any moment.
I hate people who do that stuff though.
Yeah.
If you always have your fucking phone, I know that's a sort of grouchy old man opinion, but there's people who have their headphones and stuff when they're talking to cashiers, and it's fucking pull your fucking headphones out. You're talking to someone. It's terrible.
That's another thing I never hear anymore is the word netiquette.
Oh yeah, that was the good shit.
Yeah.
Well, there isn't etiquette on the internet now.
How do you think that went away? How did that erode?
I think it was more of a buzzword than anything that really applied.
Well, I mean, I feel like, like in the early days of AOL, like when I was, like a teenager or something, like the attitude was just like, oh, you can't go on the internet and lie to someone. Like, they'll find out. Whereas today, that's very, very different. But, to go a little bit back to video games, I mean, something I wonder about is, like, I'm sure, have you heard this phrase, like, vote with your dollars? Like, people say, like, oh, if there's
Sounds
a game
very
coming out.
American.
Yeah, I had a feeling you were going to say that. Have you? But it's an expression people say where they're, yeah.
I have heard it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you put your money where you want things to be.
But I mean, it's kind of a short-sighted mentality, because if you don't put your money there, then other people just will in your place. And so, like, I wonder, like, if people who don't make games would like to see games change, like, what can they actually do? Like, there's really no way to protest or to make it clear, like, you want to buy stuff, just not the stuff that's coming out.
And also, if you said something bad about them, the video games people would be like, there's I don't know how popular it really is, but at least where I'm from in Sweden, there's an expression called sätta sig på tvären, which you will have difficulty spelling, I assume.
I will be sharing the audio of this with you, and you can spell it for me.
Yeah. It's
yeah.
Sitting down on the side, or it's not necessarily sitting down. It's like standing sideways, which means it's sort of implied it's the same way when you swallow something, like a long piece of something, and it sits across instead of going vertically down throat. It just sort of stops. It sits there, but it shouldn't, and it's sort of like refusing to go any further.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people do when people talk shit about their games. So if somebody from the sort of movie, I know it's happened a lot of times, people are like, yeah, video games are fucking childish and stupid.
Yeah.
They don't get a good response to that, even though I think it's a simplistic view, but it's well-founded to some degree, because a lot of video game culture is very childish and stupid.
Mm-hmm.
The video games people don't appreciate hearing that to such an extent that they refuse to acknowledge it.
So, I mean, you said a couple times that you feel like you sound pretty grumpy, and I know you said that there's a lot of things that bum you out, but I mean, do you use
harsher language than I should?
No, I mean, I'm trying to soften the blow a little bit here. And also, that email, I think, was written in, like, December or May of this year, or December of last year. There's no way that never mind, I didn't time travel. But, I mean, like, what do you feel like keeps you from participating? And because I think you mentioned, like, you have some friends on Skype, and certainly you tweeted at me and we're having a conversation. But it sounds like you're really not, as you said, like, participating in the culture around games either, right?
No, Steve Gaynor said on I can't remember what the podcast was called. It was a pretty cool podcast he was on recently.
Yeah.
He sort of started off by saying, I was into visual arts, and I was into animation, and I was into movies. But then I realized what I really care about is video games.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was a fascinating perspective to have, because I couldn't disagree more. I've always been in video games, but I've never wanted to. Well, yeah. I have wanted to. I sort of had the ambition to do something cool with video games as a teenager, but it's like, compared to everything else, at least to me, video games feel really bad. Like, they feel simple and kind of stupid. Not inherently necessarily, but it's very, very difficult to find anything that sort of makes an impression. And I know a lot of people have a very specific moment in video games that they sort of said was life-changing to them. I think people have been talking about, like, the first time they played the Sonic games, or like they played Final Fantasy VII or something like that. It was like a deeply emotional experience for them.
Yeah.
I don't know if life-changing experience is anything I've ever had, but strongly emotionally connecting to something, or like being like overwhelmed by how magical something is to you.
Yeah.
That definitely has not happened with video games for me. There's stuff I find very interesting, but it's a very forensic sort of interesting. I sort of look at it and go like, this is interesting because of this reason, but it's never like, this is so striking and so good. I've had this very surgical perspective on video games because what I probably liked most about them when I was young was that it's like a stage play or like a cartoon, but you can swap out the characters. So I've always had this like operating table attitude to them.
Yeah, I mean...
So the sort of strong emotional moments, I'm more curious how they made that than how it feels, usually.
Do you feel like you can find that sort of information about like why they made those creative choices?
It's very hard with video games, and I think...
Why is it so hard? Because
video games is it's completely a black box. Nobody gets to see.
Why though?
No idea. I mean, it's super strange.
I've joked that like this project I'm doing basically like Chinese water torture on that, and I'm trying to change that. But like, why? I don't get like why it's so secret. Because you can find out like why did they use this type of lens in this movie?
Yeah, you can find out all kinds of shit. You can find out all the stuff about who wrote and directed each episode of the X-Files, but you can't find on Wikipedia at least who wrote the episodes of The Walking Dead.
Is that true?
You don't. It's not listed in like you can see like writers on this season, but the season like the episode listing doesn't have writer or anything like that. At least from what I remember, which is strange because that's the sort of thing that's so approximating a TV serial that it should seem like natural to approach it as one.
Yeah. I mean, I always I don't know.
It's probably in the credits though, but I don't think video games people are interested. There are famous people in games, but they're not famous to anyone outside of the people who make games usually.
But I mean, excuse me. I mean, like, even the times I've been an editor at a publication and we have like a physical product out, like a magazine or something. Like, we still have the masthead. Like, we even list like who our interns are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of a thing where like, I mean, I've speculated that maybe some of this has to do with just like the way business culture was in Japan when the industry started, which is like. I don't know, I feel like I've talked about this before. Yeah, where like you would finish those games and like you said, like you'd see the credits, but the credits would mainly be fictitious names because the companies didn't want to have their best employees poached.
Oh shit. That's really good.
I mean, that's the legend about it.
It's probably true. I imagine it probably is, but
yeah.
Well, I think it's grown to such a huge degree as well that it's...
But we're still not getting like but it's like not the 1980s anymore, and we're still not getting the majority of our games from Japan. I mean, like I think too, like there's like some Atari games too, where like there's an Easter egg room where the person who made the game hid their name. As I say that, I was like, oh, I should look up whoever that person is because I'm always thinking of different people I should talk to. But I don't know. I mean, do you feel like that sort of the lack of information? Does that somehow like impact the audience or the perception of games where there's just so little that's known?
Well, I know people within games have been talking about how bad it is that there's a cult of personality, but I don't think that exists particularly much in video games.
Yeah.
It's like, to me, Sean Vanneman is famous. But nobody would know who he is. Even the people who play the game would be like, yeah, maybe I saw that name somewhere. But, people like him are video games. It's sort of, it should be more of a cult of personality. And I think Tim Schafer actually talked a lot about this, how it was in the 90s. They wanted their names credited on the packaging because they found it really interesting that you could have like the director and stuff on movies and things like that, and it would say on the front who made it, even though it usually isn't completely true that they made it themselves.
Right.
But you get some of that with like Hideo Kojima. People care about Hideo Kojima. But that sort of disappeared. I think in the 2000s people... I don't really know why or what happened, but there's definitely... like, I think today people would be more like, why is Sid Meier so full of himself? Than like, why does Sid Meier make such good games?
Yeah.
You had John Carmack's face and John Romero's. Wait, not John. Yeah, they're both John. That's true.
In the game.
Yeah.
In is that Doom 2?
Yeah, you could kill John Romero's face in Doom 2, I think. And you had Carmack as a special texture in Quake 2. I think you could put him in the map if you wanted to, as a portrait kind of thing. And I think Brendan Shung did that in Malfunction Junction, which is the 4th Citizen Able. There's like an art gallery, and he has all the dev portraits in there. But that sort of thing used to pop up, and I think it's probably in there. But I remember, I think it was Brendan Shung talked to Twitter. It was like the design for this water bottle in Call of Duty Black Ops 2 or 3 or 4, or I don't even know the number, is so good. And then the dude who made it was like, thanks. And there's no way you'd find that out, like from playing the game.
You're going to have to send me a link to that. I should interview the guy who designed the bottle of water.
That was months ago, though. It was on Twitter as well, so it's hard to come back to.
No. If you happen to notice stuff like that, I'm always looking for, like, who are the people who, like, they just worked on the texture for the handle of the gun.
Stuff like Activision. How the heck are you going to get any insight into that? I think you could probably get...
I have ways.
Yeah, I suppose.
Which sounds really ominous, but, like, like when I started this project... I guilty. Although people hear The Onion and then they just they think it's a satire, and they're like, whatever, you're not really.
You're gonna talk shit about us? I don't want to talk.
That's actually the first time in USA Today where I was credited as a journalist. I was like, all right, I guess that's what I am. So someone else called me that, but
good.
When I started this, people said like no one in AAA would ever talk to me, and then when people in AAA started seeking me out to talk, then the next thing was like, oh, no one in Japan will ever talk to you, and then I've done 2 interviews in Japan, so I'm pretty confident, like, I can wait it out, and this thing will get a little bit more clout and reach, but that was something I was actually going to ask you about, was clout, was like, with people in the industry, like, not even necessarily just a Kojima, but, people who get a big reputation in video games, like, what do you think their clout seems to get them?
Nothing at all. I mean, people don't recognize those people on the street. I think that's probably one of the appealing things about video games as well. I wouldn't mind being famous in video games because nobody cares.
Nobody cares? What do you mean?
It's a good place to be a celebrity because the only people who care are interested in your work.
Yeah.
It would be kind of outrageous to see someone, like, imagine seeing, like, a TMC piece on Warren Spector or some shit. That would be nuts. That would never happen. The only people who care are, like, yeah, I made Deus Ex, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And they play Deus Ex and they love it, or they pretend to have, because they're fake gamer boys.
I mean, have you seen, I don't know if this is even on your radar at all, but, Stephen Colbert, he's got the Late Show. He's had, like, a couple of, like, video game things on TV. Have you caught wind of that at all, or have you seen any of that?
He seems like a pretty good hype man or pitch guy.
Stephen Colbert?
Yeah, for people who don't really get their stuff out there. Usually,
yeah.
Although sometimes it's like, he was putting on Run the Jewels.
Yes, yeah.
And it was like, they're so indie, they have TV on the radio as their backing band. I was like, TV on the radio ain't that indie.
I mean, but for like a late night show, I mean, that's a fairly hip booking.
Yeah. He put on a Swedish band called Dungen.
Yeah.
It was so surprising, and he's put on, I think he's had The Tallest Man on Earth, which is like from where I live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's from around there. I've seen him like
I didn't know that.
With 5 people in a barn ages ago.
Well, like speaking of like just like the things like creative choices, I mean, like, is there stuff you've always wondered about the industry and how it works that like you've just never been able to find out, but that you're always wondering about?
I'm the kind of tech guy who cares about engine stuff to some extent, because I've worked a lot. I'm flying around the map now, as I said. So there's I would really like to know how much BSP and CSG is left in the id Tech 3 fork they used to make the COD engines.
And I have no idea what you're talking about.
Binary space partitioning and constructive solid geometry.
Yeah, I still don't know.
It's the best stuff. You gotta have that in your engine, but nobody does anymore.
What does that stuff do?
BSP splits the world in two. It's mainly to sort of determine what's what. You know how Quake maps look with those like big chunks? It looks like big chunks cut out of rock.
Yeah.
With those edges. That's because it's a mesh you textured by putting down the blocks and cutting up the blocks and stuff like that. And then it turns all those blocks into the sides. And there's an inside and an outside. The outside you can't access in the map, and the inside is all the traversable space. So you have this perfect collision detection because nothing can go outside. You can't move around in the void outside, so you can't fall through the world.
Yeah.
And CSG is when you put two of those blocks intersecting each other and then compile the map, they become the same thing. It's constructed solids. It's what happens first to determine what's the mesh of the world, so it doesn't have to think about it as blocks. It thinks about it as a sort of papercraft hoe.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about that in Call of Duty because that's so antiquated by now.
And there's nowhere you can go to find that out?
Nope, because it's Call of Duty. Well, there probably is. Like, there's always some weird forum where people do weird stuff for engines that you thought nobody had access to. But it's hard to find. It's very hard to find. You couldn't, like, the stuff on the engines you find when you look up idtech 4 on Wikipedia is tiny.
Yeah.
You get like, Carmack's reverse. It's like, okay, cool, but that's not the entire engine. There's a ton of stuff, like what did they do with their potentially visible set stuff, which is how to call geometry when you're not seeing it, that kind of thing. And I'm not a programmer or very technically inclined at all, but since I've worked so long with the Half-Life 1 engine, I've come to sort of appreciate and care about all this stuff, and I've worked with Quake and Doom engines and stuff like that. And there's no way to find it. There's nothing on it, except like enthusiast forums. And since it's like Quake 1 tech usually, how much of that still remains? Like the Half-Life editing community is kind of abysmal, and there's so many weird tricks in these editors that you have to have someone sort of tell you some of it, because there's no way you'd figure it out on your own. There's no instruction for a lot of this stuff.
So how do you think the games media, I mean, do you pay attention to, I know you mentioned like a couple of podcasts and stuff, but do you read any of the game blogs and sites or magazines or anything?
I like Giant Bomb. And I used to read a lot of Gamma Sutra, but I've sort of fallen off of that, which is dumb because that's sort of, they talk a lot about the stuff I care about. But I've been listening to the Idle Thumbs podcast for a very long time as well. Mm-hmm. Even though they're just rambling now that they don't have Daniel on anymore, who actually plays any video games. They're like me now.
So, I mean, like, I'm curious, like, what do you think the games media could maybe be doing to, like, help improve the industry or any other things we've talked about? Giant
Bomb got asked this a couple months back on the podcast. I think it was this spring or last spring, actually. How am I supposed to know? They were asked, like, why don't you do more extensive coverage and why don't you do deeper dives or ask more difficult questions at events? And they were like, we can't because we're not allowed to. The people there are so press trained that they're not supposed to answer anything but the stuff on their press leaf. So you get to either ask the questions they want you to, or you don't get to ask questions at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, well, from a journalistic point of view, that's atrocious. That's like, you can't investigate games because of that, or you can, obviously, if you try hard enough. I think Austin Walker's been doing a good job, and Patrick Klepek did a very good job with that as well. But it's so very opaque. It's so hard to get in there and get anything on it, and that's the way it is because that's the way the marketing works. Whenever, like, everything has to be the big splash. You can't say, yeah, we're working on the new Assassin's Creed before you have the new Assassin's Creed almost ready to show. Mm-hmm. Because people don't know how video games are made at all. They're not going to understand that white circle is going to be a dude in a while.
Yeah.
But it's like drawing a stick man, but you do the sticks out of order. That's how you make a game, and people have no understanding of that, and it's very hard to imagine.
I mean, just because they can't understand how it's made doesn't mean that there's not interesting other stuff to talk about. I mean,
I think they probably should show it.
Most people don't really know how movies are made.
Yeah, but for some reason people don't care when people come out of their set and they're like, "So you're making a movie, cool, huh?" And it's like, "Yeah, I'm writing about this movie you're making." It's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, maybe it won't get released in like 17 years, but you can write about it if you want to." That's not what happens with games. People are like, "Oh yeah, 10 years ago we had this prototype we had to scrap. We can talk about it now." It's like, what the fuck? What?
Yeah.
What? Because everything is a pitch and everything is marketing in games. There's probably, because it's so linked to the internet, like everything will go out as some sort of marketing material. Everything has to work as marketing material because you can't put anything out and expect it to be just a thing you put out because it's fun or because someone asked. And also everything is subject to change with a game because games don't start with a story usually.
I mean, that can happen in books too, or anything else. Like, there are so many books too where, like, you know, the same thing can happen as in games where the publisher will shut down, and you know, if you're the author, you went through, you wrote the proposal, you got an agent or a publisher, you got an advance, you wrote it, you worked with an editor, and then the publisher can run out of money and it'll never be out. But people still know about it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, games is weird.
Yes.
This is.
I'm actually not sure why it is that way, like fully, because I've heard developers talk about that sort of stuff, and you know, the Idle Thumbs people, like most of them, are working on Firewatch,
right?
And they got asked that, and they were like, "I don't know why it is that way, but we're doing that way as well." You know, it's like we don't want to show stuff before it's showable.
Yeah.
But they have to some extent. It's like occasionally there's a blog post where Jane Eng, I think, I don't know how her last name is pronounced.
Yeah. NG.
Two consonants. Yeah. So
in a transcript, it'll look like, you know, you'll know how it was pronounced.
Okay, cool. She shows, like, she had a stream where she made a lantern in a coffee pot or something like that. Or maybe it was the lantern I thought looked like a coffee pot. I can't remember. But that sort of thing happens occasionally. And recently, Frontier Developments, who do Elite Dangerous, had a live stream where they actually showed, like, this is work in progress, how it's going to look when you end up on planets. Mm-hmm. And I think they maybe don't appreciate how much that actually helps them, because people expect the Horizons expansion, which is really expensive, to look like crap, because it's like, oh, it's going to be terrible in this way or that way. You can't really go down on the planet. It's going to look ugly. But then they showed it, and everybody in the comments were like, holy shit, all the time. And people were really psyched about it and thought, like, that this is really cool. This is going to be amazing and that sort of thing. And I think the sort of attitude that you have to show things once they're perfect is sort of born out of the fact that people don't... and I think actually the game's consumers don't respect the work in progress, really. At least not in the AAA space. I don't think they would. Because they're always eager to find something to pounce at, you know? It's always like, this is not as good as Halo 4 because the people in this game are capsule colliders. They're not people. If it's in development, you know. So. Yeah.
Well, so believe it or not, I just have one more question for you. It's a big one.
Have I answered any of these questions?
I don't know if any of my questions have answers. If I'm being honest, I mean, they're just sort of like discussion points, or I think of these as like, you know, like thought exercises, or just conversations. But we'll talk a little bit after, like, about like how you think it went and everything.
Okay.
But, so don't sweat it or anything. But what do you think video games have accomplished?
Nothing. I don't know. Well, very little. I can't... Well, I think to a lot of people they've been very important personally. And I think a lot of like really marginalized people have talked about how important it was to have some sort of community within video games. It's like, I had my pals on the Doom forums, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because people didn't like that I was gay in real life, and they thought it was a problem, and sort of they accepted me, which is, you know, a very rare case on the internet.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I can't think of very much they've actually done in terms of like making the world a better place. I think that's unfortunate. They have a lot of reach.
You know, I decided to be the last question, but you know, I often think about this word community, which is like a non-internet concept, right? Like we had the concept before the internet exists.
Yeah, for a while.
But for a little while, for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Like, what does the word community seem to mean on the internet? Like, what do you think people mean when they say that?
A bunch of nerds who agree, and then someone comes to buy it, and they disagree, and they kick them out.
What does the word community mean in video games? Like, in the space on the internet about video games, what does the word community mean there?
I mean, I don't know. It's very... You get these, you have the indie games communities. Sort of people who do like IGF stuff. That's one of them. You have the people on Tixsource. That was the major one for a long time. But I don't know how tight they are as communities. I think they're mostly like people who are interested in sort of the same things. I've never been part of any like real life nerd community, so I don't know how it compares.
Yeah.
I've had like tangentially, I've popped by because I had friends who were like really into magic cards or stuff like that, and I really hated those spaces usually.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of people there, but they're all kind of the same as well because they're all super nerdy and really usually very awkward people with extremely strong opinions about things that absolutely don't matter. And I think that's the sort of community you get with games online as well, usually. But what it means, like as a word for games, that's hard to say. I think you probably had... I can't remember if it was Matty Bryce who said like, yeah, people had this thought about the trans game community, a sort of oh shit, what's her name? The protagonist of the game.
We can slot it in.
Yeah, I think the game was called the same thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe she was mad in the game. I can't remember. But anyway, you had people like her and what's the name of the woman who made this for you?
Anna Anthropy?
Yes, that's right. You had all these people, Merit Copas, who people were like, these are the gaming trans crowd, but they're not really. Like, they barely know each other, most of them. And one of them talked about like that, like it was this one group with one attitude, and it's not true at all. And I think the communities are very rare because I think you have the communities in games that aren't related to the development, and it's more unusual for me to engage those at all because I really don't get along in enthusiast crowds like that. They're like really indulgent in their medium and really loud and enthusiastic about it because it seems so... It seems very shallow, and it usually is very... it usually is very focused on just having the same opinion and doing the same jokes as everyone else.
Just a quick note, Anton and I had obviously wrapped up our chat and then proceeded to continue to talk for a little bit through text before deciding to hop back on and finish up our conversation.
Well, you just said that there's like a really... I'm recording now. You just said that there's like a really qualitative way that the discussion of games typically goes.
I think that's the specific thing that often goes wrong about it, is people have this opinion about this is bad or this is good. It's like everything is elevator pitches, you know? And it at least was for a couple of years. People said all the games were this meets this meets this, which is in terms of marketing as well, which is outrageous because everything should be able to stand on its own legs. At least it should try to. And I think it's absurd that things should be judged compared to everything else. And there's the sort of attitude that sort of spawn out of that this game has this, so it's good, or this game has this, so it's bad.
Yeah.
Or these graphics are uninteresting and things like that. I don't think that's like true at all. I think there's this hideous, really shitty game I love called Montezuma's Revenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's barely playable, but I love it so much because it's so fucking weird. It looks like nothing because it's from an age where like it's late 90s computer graphics, but it's really badly done. And it's you're collecting bananas in a huge temple. It's first person, but you use the arrow keys only. And it's like it has full body awareness for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very strange game. And there are specific reasons, there's lots of specific reasons why I think that's such an interesting or strange game, and I appreciate it so much. But I couldn't put that down in like a tweet, So that's not really a valid internet opinion about a game.
I think it's valid.
Yeah,
I mean,
it probably is, but it's not like it doesn't fall into the same sort of sphere as the common as the common opinions about games.
So what were you saying really quick? And I hate to ask you to repeat yourself. But what were you saying about like when you tell someone what the point is and they try to flip it on you?
Oh yeah. Well, if someone has an opinion of something and you say like that's not the point, you say that's not the entire point specifically, they would ask you what the entire point is, which is not like what you were talking about at all, because what's interesting to them is this or that. It's always the white or the black. The sort of soft space does not really exist in their opinions.
Yeah.
And I think that's very unfortunate.